For 7 years, Terra had waited for Horus. Now the waiting was over. But before the first guns fired, another battle was already taking place. Beyond reality, the Emperor sat alone before a dying fire. He did not appear as the golden ruler of imperial legend. Here, in the realm of thought and nightmare, he looked old, tired, almost human. The darkness spoke with the voice of a son. It accused him of building an empire upon lies, of denying godhood while demanding obedience from mankind. Then it took the shape of a great black wolf. Behind it waited other eyes, the gods that had transformed Horus from a rebel primarch into the vessel of chaos. They claimed their chosen son had returned to the cradle of humanity. The Emperor denied them. He called Horus their puppet. He told the powers behind him that they needed the War Master because they possessed nothing true of their own. No honest strength, no weapon that was not built from deception. Then he told them the one thing they could not tolerate. They feared Horus, and Horus would fail. The darkness laughed. The fire bent beneath its pressure. For a moment, the Emperor became a corpse seated upon a throne. But he did not surrender. The war for Terra had begun before a single traitor ship entered the solar system. It had begun in the warp. On the first day of 014.M31, warning sirens sounded across Terra. They cried from the Imperial Palace, from the great spaceports, from hive cities where billions could not see the sky. Workers stopped, soldiers raised their heads, families fell silent. Everyone understood. Horus had come. High above Uranus, aboard the prison ship Aeacus, one woman woke from a dream. Mercedes Olaton had once been a remembrancer attached to the Luna Wolves. She had witnessed the Great Crusade at its brightest. Then she had watched Horus turn against the Imperium. Mercedes had returned carrying memories too dangerous to remain free. For 7 years, she had lived behind locked doors. Her jailers had removed the recording implants from her skull. They had taken everything except her dreams. Now she dreamed of Garviel Loken, of wolves beneath moonlight, of Horus killing the Emperor, and of a voice telling her she was finally going home. At the edge of the solar system, that home was already under attack. The first enemy vessel emerged from the warp beyond Pluto. It never completed the journey. Plasma tore through its prow. Macro shells smashed into its armor. Mines ripped the dying ship apart. On the bridge of the striked frigate Lacrimae, Sigismund watched it burn. He commanded the fleet guarding the first sphere. Around him stretched a defensive web tens of thousands of kilometers deep. Mines, torpedo fields, gun platforms, hundreds of warships. Even the moons of Pluto had become fortresses. Rogal Dorn had spent years preparing for this moment. Sigismund had spent those years carrying a wound no weapon had made. He had once abandoned an appointed command because Euphrates Keeler warned him that he must stand beside Dorn at the end. Dorn had seen his choice as faith placed above duty. He had told Sigismund that he was no longer his son. Now Sigismund waited at the edge of the system, determined to prove that he stood exactly where he was needed. Then reality broke open. Ships poured from the warp by the hundred. The first wave was made mostly of human-crewed vessels sent forward to absorb Dorn's fire. More than 100 died within seconds. Still they came. Then an Iron Warrior's bombardment ship emerged behind them. The Arinies, 5 kilometers of armor built around 3 Nova cannons. It fired the instant it entering real space. 3 projectiles, each the size of a Titan, detonated inside the Imperial defensive field. Gun platforms vanished, minefields ignited. The darkness became a newborn sun. Sigismund gave the order to engage. The Imperial fists drove into the enemy while the traitor ships were still clawing free of the warp. They killed one, then another, then another. But for every vessel destroyed, 3 more appeared. The first assault was not meant to defeat Dorn's outer defenses. It was meant to bury them beneath bodies. Hours later, the light of the battle reached Terra. The people below looked up and saw new stars burning in the night. They were not stars. They were ships. And the solar war had begun. Dorn had not built a single wall around Terra. He had built 5. The solar system was divided into defensive spheres. Sigismund commanded the first at Pluto. Halbracht held the second near Uranus. Other fleets waited at Jupiter, Mars, and Terra itself. Each sphere contained warships, minefields, gun platforms, and fortress moons. But distance remained an enemy. A message from Pluto could take hours to reach Terra. By the time an order returned, the battle might already be over. So each commander had been given one task: hold, bleed the enemy, buy time for the walls behind him. Inside the Bob Bastion, Admiral Neora Sukasson watched the attack spread across a model of the system. Thousands of vessels were forcing their way through the Chthonic Gate near Pluto. A Mechanicum emissary urged her to send reinforcements. Sukasson wanted to agree. Then Rogal Dorn entered. With him came Jagatai Khan, Sanguinius, and Malkador the Sigillite. Dorn refused to reinforce Pluto. The first sphere could not hold against the force Horus had committed. Sending more ships would only give the traitors more lives to take. The Khan questioned the strategy. Was Horus truly attacking through the gates? Or was he preparing to surround them from the darkness? Dorn believed the answer lay in time. Robute Guilliman and the surviving loyalists were advancing behind Horus. The War Master had to break Terra before relief arrived. So he would strike hard, fast, and with everything he had. Sanguinius was less certain. The brother they remembered no longer existed. Something else wore his face now. Even so, the angel agreed with Dorn's final command. Every wall would be held, every kilometer purchased with traitor blood. Then Malkador revealed another problem. No astropathic warning would come from the outer system. The warp around Sol was howling. Near Uranus, the second attack began. Lord Castellan Halbracht waited before the ancient Elysian gate with the fleet of the second sphere. The dust inside the gate began to turn. Lightning spread through it. Then 3 enormous ships emerged. They had once been cargo vessels. Perturabo had transformed them into weapons. Their hulls were packed with failing reactors and corrupted machinery. They rushed the Imperial defenses like fire ships. The defenders tore them apart. That was exactly what the Iron Warriors wanted. The explosions released radiation and scrap code. Sensors died. Servitors convulsed. Targeting systems went blind. 8 Iron Warriors battleships translated behind the fire and opened fire. Then something even larger pushed through. The Daughter of Woe. A space hulk built from dead ships, broken fortresses, and asteroids fused together by the warp. It was nearly the size of a moon. Assault craft poured from its surface. Halbracht ordered every gun to fire. He understood that the second sphere might already be doomed. His duty was to decide how expensive its death would be. But Pluto and Uranus were only part of the attack. Far deeper inside the system, a stolen Imperial Fists battle barge returned to reality. The War Oath. Ezekiel Abaddon stood aboard it, staring toward Sol. Beside him waited Zardu Layak of the Word-Bearers. Human sacrifices burned around the priest. Millions had died to make this passage possible. Slaves, soldiers, entire populations reduced to blood and souls. The 1,000 Suns had guided the ritual. Azek Ahriman appeared before Abaddon as a psychic projection. Abaddon despised the sorcery, but it had achieved what Dorn believed impossible. The largest fleets should have emerged at the system's edge. Instead, the warp had carried an entire armada beyond the normal boundary. Aurora light spread across the void. The stars bent. Then the darkness filled with ships, tens of thousands of them. Sons of Horus, word-bearers, war engines of the Dark Mechanicum. A force large enough to conquer entire regions had appeared behind the outer walls. The battles at Pluto and Uranus were not failures. They were distractions. Dorn's first spheres were protecting gates the main traitor armada had already bypassed. Abaddon opened a channel to every ship. The blade falls. Engines ignited across the darkness, and the true invasion began its descent toward the sun. While fleets burned around Uranus, Mercedes Alaton tried not to sleep. She failed. Her dream returned her to the home she had abandoned on Terra. Warm air moved through open windows. Books stood where she remembered them. And in the center of the room sat a woman Mercedes had not seen in years. Euphrates Keeler. They had once served together as remembrancers among the Luna Wolves. But Keeler was no longer merely an artist. She had become the first saint of a faith the Imperium officially denied. And she had entered Mercedes' dream with a warning. Keeler showed her an ancient device, rings of brass marked with forgotten symbols for planets and constellations. As the rings turned, the symbols aligned. It was not astrology. It was a design, a ritual being created across the solar system. Keeler explained that 2 wars were being fought at once. In reality, Horus attacked with ships, soldiers, and guns. In the warp, the Chaos Gods pressed against the Emperor. The Emperor was holding them back. That was why they needed Horus. Their champion would break the physical defenses protecting Terra. But the slaughter across the system had another purpose. Every death, every burning ship, every battlefield, all of it was shaping a vast ritual in the warp. Dorn had prepared for a war fought across distance and time. He had not prepared for one fought across 2 realities. Keeler told Mercedes to reach him. Dorn had believed her when she first brought proof of Horus's betrayal to Terra. He might believe her again. Mercedes asked how she could escape a prison cell. Keeler promised that a path would open. Then the dream collapsed. The sky turned purple, the windows shattered, and Keeler gave her final warning. Horus was already here. At Pluto, traitor assault craft struck the fortresses guarding the Chthonic Gate. Inside them rode a new generation of sons of Horus. Most had never seen Chthoniya. They had never marched in the Great Crusade. They had been created in months rather than trained across decades. Recruits were processed in batches of thousands. Those who died beneath the apothecary's blades were discarded. The survivors were implanted, hypnotized, armored, and sent into battle. They copied the markings and war cries of the old legion, but beneath those traditions, they were mass-produced killers. Crude, inexperienced, and numerous enough to be spent without hesitation. One of them was Sadaran. His assault ram smashed into a loyalist void fortress. The defenders killed his squad leader almost immediately. Sadaran kept moving. He broke through barricades and discovered the difference between implanted knowledge and experience when an Imperial fist nearly destroyed him. The newborn legionary survived through savagery. Horus did not need every warrior to be a veteran. He only needed enough to keep the defenders killing until they were overwhelmed. Then Mercedes woke. The prison ship Aeacus was dying around her. Sirens screamed, the deck rolled, gunfire echoed through the cells. Her jailers were executing the prisoners rather than let them fall into enemy hands. A shell tore open the ship. Air, bodies, and debris vanished into space. The impact killed Mercedes' guard and broke open her cell. Keeler had been right. A path had opened. Mercedes ran. Most prisoners were already dead. One was still alive. A voice called from behind a sealed door, promising he knew a way off the ship. Mercedes found a key on a corpse and released him. He was impossibly tall and thin. A metal band covered the third eye in his forehead. His name was Nihilus, a navigator of House Yashar. Together they crossed the collapsing vessel. Gravity failed. Automated weapons hunted them through the corridors. Nihilus led Mercedes toward a hangar bay. 3 shuttles waited there, surrounded by corpses and burning fuel. Only one still functioned. They climbed aboard. The hangar doors opened only part way. There was barely enough space. Behind them, fire spread across the deck. Ahead waited a battle raging across the void. The shuttle launched. Its wings missed the gap by meters. The broken Aeacus tumbled away behind them. For the first time in 7 years, Mercedes was free. Then Nihilus looked through the viewport. His face changed. Something was waiting outside. The stars vanished, and the darkness reached for them. The darkness did not kill Mercedes. It delivered her into another kind of prison. Her shuttle drifted through the battle above Uranus as stations and habitats burned around it. One of those habitats was Cordelia. When the attack began, Cadmus Vec had rushed his family aboard the ore hauler Antaeus. Thousands of civilians crowded the docks behind them, but the station was already coming apart. Vec forced the crew to release the ship while people were still running toward it. If they waited, everyone would die. The Antaeus escaped with nearly 1,000 refugees. Moments later, Cordelia vanished in white fire. The decision saved lives. It also condemned everyone left on the docks. Then the Antaeus received a distress signal. It came from Mercedes' shuttle. The captain wanted to ignore it. An unidentified military craft could make them a target. Vec ordered them to answer. He had already abandoned thousands. He refused to abandon 2 more. Mercedes and Nihilus were brought aboard at gunpoint. Their clothing identified them as prisoners. Their shuttle had no markings. And when Vec asked why Mercedes had been imprisoned, she could not tell him. She could only say that she needed to reach Terra, that she had to speak with Rogal Dorn. No one believed her. Her hands were bound. She had escaped 1 prison ship only to become a prisoner aboard a civilian vessel fleeing through a war zone. On Terra, Admiral Sue Casson finally left the command chamber. She had 2 hours to rest before returning to the defense of the system. Sleep would not come. The first reports from Uranus had begun to arrive. Then someone knocked at her door. It was Jagatai Khan. The Warhawk had not come to issue an order. He had come to discuss Rogal Dorn. The Khan knew Sue Casson had doubts about the defensive plan. Dorn was sacrificing entire regions of the system to strengthen the approaches to Terra. Ships had been taken from Neptune and other colonies. Populations that had obeyed the Imperium now watched the battle light and begged for protection that would never come. The strategy was necessary. That did not make its cost easier to accept. And the damage was no longer confined to the battlefield. Across Terra, people were hearing wolves in their dreams. At Actinus Hive, 10,000 sealed themselves inside a section of the city and cut off their own air. Mars had fallen silent. Panic was spreading faster than any fleet. The ritual Mercedes had seen was already touching the minds of humanity. The Khan compared Dorn to a bird that had lived its entire life inside a cage. Duty, honor, obedience. Every responsibility had become another bar. Dorn had strengthened those bars until there was no space left to move. The Khan did not believe his brother's strategy was wrong. He believed it was destroying him. Dorn would hold every position for as long as it served Terra. Then he would abandon it. Millions would die because of those decisions, and Dorn would carry every death as if he had killed them himself. That was why the Khan wanted Sigismund to keep questioning him, not to change the strategy, but to make certain Dorn still heard the human cost before choosing necessity. At the edge of the system, that cost continued to rise. Pluto was drowning beneath the first assault. The Elysian Gate had become a furnace. The Daughter of Woe stood inside it like an artificial moon, while traitor ships gathered around its mass. Civilian habitats shattered, refugee craft scattered into the dark. And still, Halbrak's second sphere fought. The Loyalist commander knew reinforcements would not come. He knew Dorn had other fleets. He also understood why they could not be sent. The Solar War was not one battle. It was a chain of sacrifices. Every defense existed to preserve the next. Every commander knew he might be abandoned so that Terra could survive 1 hour longer. The Khan left Sigismund with the latest report. The enemy had entered through the Elysian path in overwhelming strength. The moons of Uranus were burning. But the defenders had not broken. Uranus held. For now. The main traitor Armada had bypassed Pluto and Uranus. But it had not entered unseen. Jagatai Khan had refused to chain every White Scar's vessel to Terra. Their strength was speed. So he scattered his fleets above and below the orbital plane, circling Sol like hunting birds. One formation was commanded by Jubal Khan. From the Lance of Heaven, Jubal saw Abaddon's Armada descending from the darkness. Thousands of ships. His formation had 4. There was no possibility of stopping them. That did not mean the White Scars would let them pass untouched. Jubal ordered his ships toward the enemy. They selected a target at the front. The Fourfold Wolf. An old warship captured by the Luna Wolves during the Great Crusade. The White Scars launched torpedoes. Then they turned and raced back into the void. The Fourfold Wolf could not evade at such speed. Torpedoes passed through its shields. The vessel split open in fire. One ship destroyed among thousands. A wound too small to slow the invasion. But that was not Jubal's purpose. The first cut had been made. The warning was traveling toward Terra. At Pluto, days of battle had reduced the void to burning wreckage. The Chthonic Gate was lost. The fortress moons Nyx and Charon had fallen, and now fired upon the remaining loyalists. Even in defeat, Dorn's preparations continued killing. Hidden traps ruptured plasma conduits. Murder servitors emerged from sealed vaults. Systems failed in the hands of their new masters. But the traitors had planted traps of their own. Agents destroyed targeting systems. Poisons spread through fortress air supplies. The first sphere was being destroyed from within and without. Sigismund had known it would end this way. While his ships fought, they secretly removed space marines, elite troops, and ammunition from the fortresses. The installations around Pluto were never expected to survive. They had existed to delay Horus. Now that delay had reached its limit. Sigismund's fleet had lost more than a third of its strength. If he remained, there would be nothing left to withdraw. He gave the order. Every surviving ship would abandon Pluto and burn toward the system's core. The fortresses and their remaining defenders would be left behind. Imperial fists were made to hold. Withdrawal felt like betrayal. But Dorn's plan required obedience, not pride. Sigismund sent the message to Terra. Pluto had fallen. Far above the system, Abaddon watched the White Scars attack. Zardu Lyak called them insects striking a leviathan. Abaddon understood them better. He had known Jubal Khan before the heresy. He had known Sigismund, Loken, brothers who now waited ahead with weapons drawn. Abaddon's idea of brotherhood had formed before he became a space marine. As a boy on Chthoniya, his father ordered him to kill 4 companions raised beside him. The price of becoming a king. Abaddon refused. He drove the knife into his father's body instead. He had never wanted a crown. He chose who deserved his loyalty. That was why he despised Lyak's claim that they were brothers because they served the same cause. Lyak followed him from the bridge. His 2 silent blade slaves moved beside him. The word-bearer asked why Abaddon walked without guards. Abaddon answered that he was never alone. He had chosen his brothers. Lyak had enslaved his. The blade slaves attacked. Their bodies split with demonic fire. Their swords fused with their hams. Abaddon met them with a short gladius. He was not the fastest warrior in the legions. Jubal was faster. Sigismund was faster. Even Loken might have been faster. But Abaddon fought without caring whether he lived. Only victory mattered. He broke through the blade slaves and reached Lyak. His weapon stopped against the priest's body. One movement would have killed him. Abaddon let him live. Lyak called that mercy a bond between their souls. Then he warned that the gods were watching him. Abaddon remained unmoved. He served Horus, not the gods. Not yet. Around them, tens of thousands of ships continued toward the sun. Pluto had fallen. Uranus was burning. And Terra knew the real blade was already inside the walls. The battle for Uranus lasted for days. 4,000 traitor warships had already passed through the Elysian Gate. Twice that number still waited in the warp. The Iron Warriors advanced without haste. They struck stations, habitats, moons. Every position was isolated, attacked, and crushed beneath superior numbers. Their losses were enormous. Perturabo considered them acceptable. From the Iron Blood, he watched his plan unfold almost exactly as predicted. That troubled him. Dorn's defenders fought with discipline. They made the traitors pay for every advance. But they did nothing unexpected. Perturabo knew his brother. Rogal Dorn was proud, stubborn, bound by loyalty and duty. But he was not a fool. A defense this predictable had to be concealing something. Perturabo ordered the assault to continue, but for the first time he began looking for the trap. Near the moon Oberon, the Antaeus searched for safety. Hundreds of refugee ships crowded the approaches. Cadmus Vec tried to contact the authorities, hoping to unload the civilians filling his cargo holds. No one answered. Then a military vessel contacted them. It asked whether Mercedes Olaton was alive. Vec believed rescue had arrived. He confirmed that she was aboard. His life word, Axinia, understood the truth an instant too late. Why would a warship fighting the largest battle in human history search for one escaped prisoner? Why would it need proof that she was still alive? The answer came in gunfire. Macro shells tore through a freighter beside the Antaeus. The attacking vessel had missed. It would not miss again. Below deck, Mercedes remained locked in a storage chamber with Nihilus. The navigator finally explained why he had been imprisoned. He had served aboard the Acontia, a ship attached to Horus's 63rd Expeditionary Fleet. After Istvan, its crew had divided between loyalists and traitors. Nihilus and the other navigators helped those who wanted to escape. The ship became a battlefield. It was lost in the warp before returning near Terra. Imperial forces killed most of those aboard. Nihilus was taken alive and buried in the nameless fortress. Now the same authorities were willing to destroy a civilian ship to prevent Mercedes from escaping. Vec opened her cell. He demanded to know why people were killing hundreds to reach her. Mercedes told him the truth. She had been a remembrancer to Horus. She had stood close enough to the War Master to witness the beginning of his fall. Her memories were dangerous. But that was not why she needed Dorn. She carried a warning from Euphrates Keeler, a saint. That word changed everything. Vec was secretly a believer in the Lectitio Divinitatis. The faith that worshipped the emperor had once been spread by his wife. Now Mercedes claimed that its most sacred living figure had sent her. Before Vec could decide what to believe, another attack struck the ships around Oberon. One vessel exploded. Its debris hit another, then another. The crowded approach lanes became a fire cascade. Hundreds died, then thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Fragments of shattered hulls tore through unshielded ships. Fuel ignited. Atmosphere vanished into space. The Antaeus twisted through the destruction while wreckage passed close enough to rip it apart. The crew wanted Mercedes dead. They believed surrendering her might save them. Vec understood the attackers had already made their decision. Everyone aboard the Antaeus had spoken to her. Everyone was now a witness. Killing Mercedes would change nothing. He gave her access to the bridge. Mercedes could not stop the fire cascade. She could not guarantee the ship would survive. But she knew that if they escaped, the hunters would follow them all the way to Terra. She needed someone powerful enough to protect them. Someone who would recognize her name. Someone who had once promised to free her. Mercedes ordered the Antaeus to transmit on the same military frequency. The message would contain only 2 words: her name and his. Mercedes Olatom. Loken. The Imperial fists fled Pluto. Horus Aximand saw victory. Volbran saw a trap. The Iron Warrior warned that Dorn's sons did not retreat while they could still stand. Aximand ignored him. The Loyalists had preserved their ships because they needed them closer to Terra. If they escaped, they would fight again. So Aximand divided his forces. The Iron Warriors would seize the fortress moons. The sons of Horus would pursue Sigismund and destroy his fleet from behind. On Terra, Dorn gathered a private council. Sanguinius, Malcador, Constantine Valdor, Admiral Sue Casson, and Andromeda 17, one of the last gene rights of Luna. The enemy had entered through Pluto and Uranus. Abaddon's Armada had appeared above the system and divided, with one force moving toward Terra and another toward Mars. The visible strategy was clear. Pin the Loyalist fleets near the throne world while greater numbers poured through the outer gates. But something did not fit. Horus had to win quickly. The attack inside the system was extraordinary, but not enough to defeat Dorn before Guilliman arrived. That meant the traitors were doing something the Loyalists could not see. Malcador named it the Warp. The war had two fronts. The wall without was made of ships, fortresses, and soldiers. The wall within was the Emperor. Every act of terror in the material universe strengthened the storm in the warp. Every death had two purposes. Malcador could no longer see through the darkness gathering around Sol. The Emperor alone held it back. For the moment, that was enough. Horus could not defeat him in the immaterial war. He first had to break Dorn's physical defenses. Sue Casson urged the Loyalists to respond to the enemy they could see. Dorn agreed, but he refused to commit the phalanx. The greatest Loyalist warship remained hidden in reserve. Dorn understood that Horus knew him, knew how he thought, knew the defenses he would build. There was still one question no one could answer. Where was Horus? At Pluto, the traitors entered Kerberos. 500,000 human soldiers died in the first assault. Iron warriors and newborn sons of Horus followed them into the fortress moon. Saturn fought his way toward its core. The deeper he advanced, the stronger the resistance became. Then every defense stopped. Guns fell silent. Doors opened. Machines collapsed. The traitors believed they had finally won. Saturn entered the reactor chamber. Lightning crawled across a vast metal sphere. Dead servitors hung from their cables. The entire moon seemed to inhale. Saturn understood too late. Dorn had never intended Kerberos to survive. For months, hidden codes had spread through the systems of Pluto's fortress moons. The program was called Vanth Primus No. When Sigismund withdrew, it awakened. Reactors overloaded. Ammunition stores opened. Every system locked the traitors inside their prize. Kerberos exploded. 205 ships died in the first blast. Mountain-sized fragments tore through the surrounding fleets. Then Hydra and Charon detonated. Fire chained backward toward the Chthonic Gate. Order vanished. The ships pursuing Sigismund suddenly found an inferno behind them. Then the imperial fists turned around. The retreat had been a lie. Sigismund drove the first sphere directly into Aximand's disordered fleet. Perturabo had been right. Dorn's defense had been too predictable because the true weapon was hidden inside the ground he surrendered. At the same moment, Sue Cassin received a report kept from her for years. Her daughter Kalia had commanded a ship within Horus's fleet. When the heresy began, she tried to escape Istvan. Traitors aboard her vessel mutinied. The Thunderbreak lost power. Horus's warships destroyed it with everyone aboard. Sue Cassin allowed herself one moment to grieve. Then she armed herself and returned to the command chamber. The first sphere had begun its counterattack. Pluto's moons were dead. The space around them was burning, and for the first time in the solar war, Horus's forces had stepped exactly where Dorn wanted them.
Sigismund's counterattack transformed Pluto into a slaughterhouse. The traitor fleet had been blinded by the deaths of the fortress moons. The imperial fists drove through it in a single formation. They were not fighting a battle. They were reaping. Horus Aximand recovered quickly. He turned the throne of the underworld and struck Sigismund's flagship. Its guns crippled the Lacrimae. Then sons of Horus teleported onto the bridge. Sigismund met them with his sword. He cut through the attackers and saw Aximand advancing through the blood. Little Horus, one of the Mournival who had betrayed the Imperium. For a moment, Sigismund believed this was the ending Euphrates Keeler had promised him, the final battle, the place where his oath would be fulfilled. He and Aximand met blade to blade. Around them, the bridge became a pit of close-range murder. Boreas fell beneath the traitors. Fafnir ran and his warriors teleported aboard to recover them. Sigismund refused to leave while Boreas remained behind. The imperial fists formed a shield wall and forced their way forward. They reached their fallen brother. Then Sigismund attacked Aximand again. His first blow severed Aximand's sword hand. His second cut through the traitor's chest. Sigismund raised his blade to finish him. Teleportation light took the imperial fists away. Aximand survived. The Loyalists abandoned the ruined Lacrimae and withdrew toward Terra. They had broken the fleet at Pluto, but they could not remain to hold what they had destroyed. Elsewhere, Abaddon remembered the day the Luna wolves found him. He had been a wounded boy hunted through the tunnels of Thonia. 2 warriors stood over him. One was Hastur Sejanus. They called themselves Slayers of Kings and Killers of Tyrants. They promised no throne, no reward, only brotherhood. Abaddon accepted. That promise became the center of his life. It explained why he followed Horus while rejecting the gods that empowered him. His loyalty was not to an idea. It was to the brothers he had chosen. On the Antaeus, Mercedes' message received no answer. The ship crossed the Gulf toward Saturn with 6 cargo holds packed with refugees. Food was running out. Fear was becoming anger. Axinia forced Mercedes to look at the people now tied to her fate. Children waited to return to homes that no longer existed. Families followed a woman they did not know while imperial hunters searched for her. Mercedes had not started the war, but her mission had made every life aboard the Antaeus part of it. Meanwhile, Abaddon's armada divided. One spear moved toward Terra, another turned toward Mars. Privateers and renegades spread outward to engage the White Scars. But a third force separated in silence. Only 12 ships, 1,000 suns, word-bearers. Sorcery hid them from sensors and mines as they descended toward a secret target. Zardu Lyak was meant to join them. He refused. The gods had ordered him to remain beside Abaddon. The War Master's plan was not simply an attack on Terra and Mars. Another blade was moving unseen. Jubal Khan watched the fleet separate. He had tracked the main spear and bled it whenever possible. But 5,000 ships were too many to destroy. So Jubal chose a different target. The Armada's strength did not live in its hulls. It lived in the commander directing them, Abaddon. Jubal prepared a strike that would cut the head from the invasion. Before leaving, he gave his knife to the young warrior Chang Shi and taught him its truth. A knife did not kill with its first cut. Each wound weakened the enemy, drained strength, created anger, blinded judgment. Only then could the final thrust reach the heart. Jubal intended to become one of those cuts. Chang Shi asked the question that now hung over the entire solar war. If Horus understood the same lesson, were the loyalists merely fighting the cuts while another blade approached their heart? Jubal smiled. Yes, but they would fight anyway. Boreas was dying. The sons of Horus had destroyed too much of his body for the apothecaries to save. He refused the half-life of a dreadnought. Before the machine stopped, he asked Sigismund why he had fought as though he wanted to die. Sigismund answered with one word: atonement. He still carried Dorn's rejection like a blade inside him. Boreas told him death would not erase his failure. Atonement meant living, fighting until the last blow of the sword. Sigismund swore it. Then Boreas died. While the first sphere fled toward the inner system, Jubal Khan began his attack on Abaddon. The White Scars struck the traitor Armada from every direction. They damaged dozens of vessels without becoming trapped in a direct engagement. Abaddon answered with bait. He ordered one of his own cruisers, the Aeolus, to appear crippled. Sons of Horus died aboard it to make the deception convincing. The White Scars closed for the kill. The Lance of Heaven appeared among them. Abaddon had found Jubal. The war oath accelerated from the Armada and trapped the White Scars battle barge. Abaddon teleported aboard with his elite warriors. They reached the bridge within minutes. It was almost empty. Jubal had expected Abaddon's counterattack. The Lance of Heaven was another lure. White Scars assault rams smashed into their own bridge. Jubal and his chosen warriors charged from the wreckage. The Lord of Summer Lightning found Abaddon in the collapsing chamber. Jubal was faster. His Guandao struck from angles that even Abaddon struggled to follow. Each cut weakened the first captain. Armor opened. Blood escaped into the vacuum. It was the lesson of the knife. Wound the enemy until the final thrust becomes unavoidable. But Abaddon understood Jubal.
He knew the White Scar would always choose movement, always create another cut. So Abaddon broke the rhythm. He caught the Guandao in his power fist. His sword entered Jubal's body and tore upward through armor, flesh, and bone. The Lord of Summer Lightning died, but his plan continued. A magnamelta hidden in an assault ram fired at Abaddon. The deck became molten metal. Zardu Lyak stepped between Abaddon and the beam. Sorcery held the fire back. Then Lyak turned it upon the weapon that had fired. Abaddon survived because of the priest he despised. Lyak reminded him of their earlier conversation. Saving a life created a bond. In the Jovian Gulf, another trap closed around the Antaeus. A stealth vessel had followed the freighter for hours. It launched an assault craft. Crimson-armored soldiers boarded the ship. They were not Horus's warriors. They were the same imperial jailers who had guarded the nameless fortress. Their mission was still to kill Mercedes and everyone who had encountered her. But something else was already aboard. Captain Zadia Coln had begun hearing voices. Fear and resentment had been growing inside her since Uranus. Years earlier, she had attended secret rituals without understanding what they served. Now the warp answered through that forgotten doorway. Coln shot refugees in the corridors. Then a shadow reached her. It spoke with her voice. It fed on every grievance she had carried. And it entered her. Cadmus Vec ran toward his children as the boarders seized the ship. They shot him down near the bridge. Oxinia found Mori and Noon. She fought the Crimson soldiers while Mercedes tried to lead the children toward their shuttle. More boarders blocked the escape. Oxinia was wounded. Mercedes and the children were trapped between two firing lines. Then the lights began to blink. Red, black, red. The thing wearing Coln moved between those flashes. It tore through the Imperial soldiers. Bodies broke. Blood froze against the walls. Then it turned toward Mercedes. The demon had not come to save her. It had come for her. Mercedes raised the pistol Oxinia had given her. She fired until Coln's body collapsed. For a moment, the corridor became silent. Jubal Khan was dead. The Antaeus was filled with corpses. And 2 hunters had nearly claimed Abaddon and Mercedes on the same day. One through sacrifice, the other through possession. Neither had succeeded. But the warp was no longer waiting outside the walls. It was already walking among them.
The Emperor climbed through a storm that did not exist in the physical world. He appeared as an old man wrapped in black rags and frozen fur. Wolves followed him through the snow. Each carried the shape of a different power. The Emperor drove them back with fire and reached one of the last sanctuaries remaining in the warp. Malkador waited inside. Here, the Sigillite appeared young. He laid cards between them. A tower struck by lightning. A wolf hiding swords beneath its cloak. Stars turning around a darkened moon. The symbols changed, but the pattern beneath them remained. The assault had begun at a precise moment. Midwinter, a rare alignment of planets. Battles occurring in an exact sequence. Something was being assembled across the solar system. Malkador could see its shadow. The Emperor could feel it growing. Neither could identify its final form. The Emperor was spending almost all his strength holding back the darkness. He told Malkador to protect Dorn and the others from the war they could not perceive. Malkador asked whether they could still win. The Emperor understood the real question. Could anything survive? He gave no answer. Aboard the hidden battle barge Ankto, Ahriman watched the same design from the other side. A psychic model of the solar system turned inside a chamber carved from jade. Planets were represented by spheres created through sacrifice. Beside them moved symbols for emotions, destinies, and forces that existed only in the warp. Blood appeared inside the crystals as battles reached the required moments. The deaths at Pluto, the fall of Uranus, fear spreading across Terra. Each became another element in the calculation. The ritual was not yet certain. Errors remained. The loyalists could still disrupt the pattern, but the alignment was growing stronger. Ahriman's small fleet remained hidden by sorcery. Its target was only a distant point of light ahead. Even Ahriman hated what they were preparing to do. On the Antaeus, Mercedes awoke among the dead. Axinia was gone. The final gunshot had torn through her neck. Cadmus Vec and most of the crew had been killed by the boarding force. Mori and Noon were alive, but their father would never reach them. Nihilus wanted to abandon the freighter and escape aboard the shuttle. Mercedes refused. Hundreds of refugees remained in the cargo holds. Earlier, she might have left them. Now she understood Axinia's accusation. Their lives had become part of her responsibility. Nihilus went to the bridge. Mercedes carried Vec's son and led his daughter through the blood-stained corridors. She took Axinia's weapons with her. Not to remember the bodyguard, to make certain she did not fail her again. Far above Terra, another prisoner felt Mercedes moving through the dark. Masik had once been a librarian of the Imperial Fists. When the Emperor banned the legions from using psychic powers, Dorn enforced the order without compromise. Masik and 3 other librarians had spent 7 years isolated aboard the Phalanx. They had been ordered to silence their abilities. Now Masik dreamed of forests, wolves, and a woman walking through an unfamiliar ship. The storm in the warp was becoming too powerful to ignore. Then the Phalanx began to move. At Uranus, Halbracht fired one final barrage. The second sphere had fought until only 100 battered warships remained. Oberon was the last loyalist moon. The Iron Warriors closed around it. Halbracht ordered the withdrawal. The people of Oberon begged the fleet to remain. They cursed the defenders as the ships abandoned them. Then their signals stopped. Uranus belonged to Horus. But Halbracht had preserved one last surprise. Before the battle, Dorn had ordered more than 300 fresh ships into the darkness between Uranus and the inner system.
They had watched their homes burn without revealing themselves. Now, Halbracht sent the rendezvous codes. His survivors would join that hidden fleet. Dorn had explained the purpose before the war began. Fortresses were not the true battlefield. Time was. Horus needed it. The Loyalists could not stop him forever. But every delay reduced the time he would have at Terra. Pluto was lost. Uranus was lost. Yet both had served their purpose. The outer walls were gone. The survivors were gathering in the darkness, and the enemy still did not understand what Dorn intended to do with them.
The Loyalists believed Horus had failed. His fleets controlled the outer system, but the forces advancing on Mars and Terra had arrived too late and in too few numbers. Dorn could destroy either spear by committing the phalanx. Sanguinius urged him to move. The Mechanicum demanded that he save Mars. Dorn refused. The largest Loyalist warship remained above Terra. Because Horus had not appeared, every visible calculation said the War Master was losing. That was exactly why Dorn refused to trust it. Sanguinius knew Horus was coming. His visions still ended with the two of them standing on the same ground. So the Loyalists waited. On Terra, the nightmares became riots. For 5 nights, terror infected the sleep of entire districts. People woke screaming. Old cults opened hidden doors. Things from the warp began entering through grief, anger, and fear. Then Garviel Loken came to Malkador. He had received Mercedes' signal. He had also learned who sent the soldiers hunting her. Malthador. The Order had not named Mercedes specifically. It covered every dangerous prisoner who escaped the nameless fortress. Kill them. Kill anyone who had encountered them. Allow no witness to survive. Loken called it murder. Malkador called it necessity. He told Loken that everyone was expendable. Space Marines, civilians, children, even Malkador himself. If those deaths preserved humanity, he would order them without hesitation. Loken refused to accept that price. He announced that he was taking a ship toward Jupiter to find Mercedes. Malkador warned that he might never reach her. Loken reminded him why the Knights-Errant existed: to accomplish what others could not. Malkador let him go. Perhaps, he admitted, small acts of nobility mattered more when the greater war had abandoned mercy. In the inner system Gulf, Ahriman reached his target, a comet surrounded by 8 gun platforms. The 1,000 suns blinded their servitors and silenced every weapon before an alarm could escape. The comet was a tomb. Its hollow interior contained the bones of heroes from the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade. The Word-bearers had guarded it before their betrayal. Dorn's warriors had purged them years earlier. But they had never asked why the traitors had remained there. The answer was hidden in the warp. The shrine had been prepared long before the siege began. Blood, memory, the remains of humanity's greatest warriors. All of it made the comet a point of power.
Ahriman and the word-bearers reopened its chambers. Human sacrifices died upon the floor. The solitarium was lowered into its center. The psychic model of the solar system began turning inside the tomb. Ahriman finally understood the scale of Horus's design. Even Magnus had been disturbed by it. This was not a plan made by a man. It was the work of something standing between mortality and godhood. The ritual began. At Uranus, Perturabo launched his fleet toward Jupiter. Halbracht's hidden ships attacked from the darkness. Nova shells tore shields from the Iron Warriors. Hundreds of loyalist vessels followed. It was enough to wound Perturabo, not enough to stop him. And while the great fleets fought, Horus released other forces behind them. Night Lords drove ships packed with murdered refugees toward Saturn. Cults awakened on Neptune. Plagues consumed isolated stations. Terror spread without strategic purpose because terror itself was the purpose. Every scream fed the powers waiting in the warp. Every atrocity strengthened the ritual inside the comet. Sigismund watched the system burn as his surviving ships reached the inner gulf. Fewer than 100 remained. Every one was damaged. Mars was under attack. Luna was threatened. The void between them was filled with enemies. Sigismund chose where his last blood would fall. Not Mars, not the outer fleets. Terra, the world that had created him. The fortress his father had commanded him to defend. Fafnir ran, pledged to stand beside him. Their ships turned toward the throne world. Behind them, the ritual gathered strength. Ahead of them, Dorn still waited for Horus. And between those 2 points, Loken went searching for the one woman who might explain how they were connected.
The Antaeus reached the outer edge of Jupiter. Safety was almost visible. The Jovian Call surrounded the planet like a sea of metal dust. Beyond it waited the fleets and weapons of the Third Sphere. Behind the freighter came the ship that had launched the boarding attack. Mercedes placed refugees at the controls. Dock workers, shuttle pilots, maintenance crews. None were prepared to command a void ship. They were all she had. Chi 32 Beta was dying, but the tech priest forced the engines to maximum power. The Antaeus ran for Jupiter. At Luna, Abaddon entered a battle he knew he could not win. The moon had become a fortress. Its ring and surface batteries guarded the approaches to Terra. Thousands of loyalist ships waited beside it. The Phalanx watched from the other side of the throne world. Abaddon's armada contained roughly 1,000 vessels, not enough to break Luna, not enough to reach Terra. Horus had still ordered him forward. He had called Abaddon his truest son, promised that he had never failed, and asked for trust. Abaddon obeyed. As the war oath entered Luna's fire, he remembered the first time Horus had welcomed him. Abaddon had awakened inside a gene vat beneath Luna's surface. He had still been a boy from Thonia. Horus offered him a hand and a mirror coin. Taking that hand meant the death of his old life.
He would rise as a Luna wolf, a son. Abaddon accepted. Now he returned to the world of his rebirth at the head of a suicide attack. On the opposite side of the inner system, 7,000 Dark Mechanicum ships descended upon Mars. Camba Diaz commanded the fourth sphere. He had spent years blockading the traitor forges below. Now the machines of those forges rose to meet the returning fleet. Weapons killed ships from beyond conventional range. Scrap code infected loyalist systems. War engines destroyed themselves, reformed, and climbed back into space. Mars crowned itself in fire. At Jupiter, the hunter caught the Antaeus. Las beans burned through its keel. The freighter's engines began to fail. The hunter moved into position for the final shot. Then another vessel arrived, a destroyer painted in impossible colors. Its crew had been fused into the ship. Their voices screamed through every vox channel. It destroyed the hunter with one barrage, not to save Mercedes, only because hunger and chance had brought it to the same place. The corrupted destroyer turned toward the Antaeus. Its song entered every mind aboard. Then it lost interest. It vanished back into the darkness. The Antaeus crossed into the Jovian Call. Defense platforms locked their weapons upon it. Mercedes believed they had reached safety only to be killed by loyalist guns. Then a voice came through the static. It asked whether Mercedes Olaton was aboard. This time, she answered. The defense weapons stood down. The voice told her to cut the engines. She was safe. Garviel Loken had found her. Inside the Comet Shrine, Ahriman prepared the final stage of Horus's ritual. More than 1 million sets of human remains filled its chambers. Heroes whose deaths carried the psychic memory of humanity's first wars of unity. The word-bearers had spent decades poisoning that memory. Even their deaths during Dorn's purge had strengthened the shrine. Now 3,024 captive psychers knelt around the solitarium. The fires at Mars and Luna appeared within its turning spheres. Pluto, Uranus, Jupiter. Every battle brought another symbol into alignment. Ahriman looked beyond the ritual and saw what waited in the warp. Thousands of ships, then tens of thousands. An armada held motionless inside currents that should have destroyed it. Demons circled the vessels. Horus had not failed to bring his main force into the solar system. His true armada had never been meant to enter through the outer gates. Abaddon's attack on Luna was not meant to conquer it. Perturabo's advance was not the final invasion. They were cuts, each death, each fear, each desperate act of resistance. All of them fed the mechanism that would create the final opening. The alignment was almost complete. Ahriman ordered the 1,000 Suns back to their ships. 3,000 psychers remained chained inside the comet. The traitor Armada waited beyond reality, and only one final element was missing.
The final element was Luna. Around the moon, the battle had become a furnace. Imperial ships held formation beneath the guns of the lunar ring. Blood Angels boarding parties drove into Sons of Horus vessels under death oaths. And through the center of it all came the War Oath. It had once belonged to the Imperial Fists. Now its hull had been altered and filled with occult machinery by the servants of Kelbor Hal. It was no longer a flagship. It was a weapon. Abaddon stood inside its teleportation chamber with the Justarin, the Reavers, and Zardu Layak. He gave a single order: full speed. The fleet opened before them. The War Oath accelerated toward the lunar ring. Defense batteries tore away its shields. Plasma fire opened its armor. Still it came. At the final moment, Abaddon activated the teleporters. He and his warriors vanished. 1 second later, the War Oath struck the ring. The explosion did more than break metal. Occult energies hidden inside the ship flooded into reality. For an instant, matter forgot how to exist. 20 kilometers of the lunar ring disappeared into shadow. Then the broken structure began falling onto the moon. Abaddon rematerialized beneath Luna, inside the ancient warrens of the Selenar gene cults. His warriors opened fire. But Luna had already served its greater purpose. At the Comet Shrine, Ahriman felt the final alignment lock into place. Every assault across the solar system had been part of it. Pluto, Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, Luna. Each world was a symbol. Each death was an offering. Each victory and defeat had fed the same design. Ahriman gave the signal. The word-bearers cut the throats of 3,024 psychers. Their deaths poured into the warp. The comet vanished. Time blinked. The sun went black. Every living soul in the solar system felt something breathe through them. Then the comet returned, not as stone, as a wound. Reality split along the path the shrine had traced through the system. Demons were dragged into the rupture and torn apart. The breach widened. Half-formed limbs and mouths spilled from it, and the sun screamed back into light. By then, Mercedi Olaton had reached the Phalanx. Dorn had moved his command aboard the fortress and taken it away from Terra. When told that Mercedi had come to warn him, he ordered her brought directly to his sanctuary. Sue Casson questioned the decision. Dorn remembered another day. Years earlier, survivors from the Eisenstein had stood in that chamber and told him Horus had betrayed the Emperor. Dorn had refused to believe them. Mercedi had shown him the truth. She had brought him the truth once. He would not make the same mistake again. That was exactly what Horus had counted on. As Mercedi crossed the Phalanx with Loken, her memories began to fracture. The corridors became passages aboard the Vengeful Spirit. She remembered Malaghurst, a room she had never known existed. A knife, a presence standing behind her. She asked Loken about Nihilus Yeshar, the navigator who had supposedly escaped with her. Loken had never heard the name. Then the alarms began. Static filled every channel. A voice pushed through the interference. Samus. Loken recognized it. Shadows climbed the walls. Something took control of Mercedi's body. She struck Loken hard enough to throw an armored space marine into the wall.
The imperial fists opened fire, and beside her stood Nihilus, except there had never been a Nihilus. The face smiled. "I am always here," it told her. "I am the man beside you." Outside the phalanx, the wound in reality tore fully open. Ships began to emerge. The World Eaters came first. Angron stood upon the hull of the Conqueror, roaring at Terra. Then came the Emperor's children. Fulgrim watched through the eyes of his fleet and laughed. Thousands more followed. The Armada that had never appeared at the system's gates. The Armada that had been waiting inside the warp. And behind them came the vengeful spirit. Demons flew before it like heralds. Horus stood upon the fortress built into its back. For the first time since the war began, he looked upon Terra. The outer defenses had not been defeated. They had been bypassed. The greatest fleet in human history had been delivered directly into the heart of the solar system. Horus watched his father's world glitter beyond the prow. Then he gave the order. "Begin."
Mercedes finally remembered. On the vengeful spirit, long before Istvan, Malaghurst had taken her into a hidden chamber. The sons of Horus doubted Loken's loyalty. They needed eyes close to him. So Malaghurst used sorcery to place a connection inside her. A door through which they could watch. The plan revealed nothing useful, but the door remained. Years later, Horus found a new purpose for it. Mercedes' warnings were real. The ritual was real. That was why the lie had worked. But Euphrates Keeler had never spoken to her. Nihilus Yeshar had never escaped the prison ship. There was no Nihilus. Mercedes had flown the shuttle alone. She had walked the Antaeus alone. She had spoken to herself while her mind created a companion no one else could see. The creature wearing Nihilus's face had guided her across the system, protected her, driven her toward Terra. Not because it wanted her dead, because it needed her alive. Mercedes was the final delivery. Dorn trusted her, the phalanx accepted her, and once she stepped aboard, the door inside her opened. Shadows flooded the fortress. The phalanx carried thousands of imperial fists, solar auxilia, and crew bred to fight. It made no difference. The enemy did not attack from outside. Demons poured through walls and sealed doors. Vox systems screamed the same name, Samus. Huskarls opened fire. Darkness became hounds, winged horrors, and warriors of exposed muscle and bone. Every creature destroyed was replaced by another. Dorn met the tide without storm's teeth. He did not need it. He crushed a demon hound with his bare hands. He seized a sword made for a space marine and wielded it in one hand. Then he advanced. No step took him backward. But Samus was more than a body. It was a storm fed by the warp breach and anchored by Mercedes. As long as she remained aboard, the demon had a path into the phalanx.
Sukhassin understood the danger. If the fortress fell, the greatest warship of the Imperium would become a weapon of chaos within striking distance of Terra. She ordered the phalanx away from the planet. Then she prepared its reactors for self-destruction. If it could not be saved, it would not be surrendered. Dorn gave another order. Deep inside the phalanx were sons he had forbidden to fight. The librarians of the Imperial Fists, psychers shackled by the Edict of Nicaea while the galaxy burned. Dorn released them. Masik and his brothers entered the battle beside Arcamus. Fire and lightning tore through the demon tide. Their joined minds took the shape of a burning predator and struck Samus. For a moment, the creature weakened. Dorn attacked, again and again. Black blood covered the bridge. The demon's body collapsed into ash and slime, but its voice remained. Samus was not gone. This had only been one shape. Dead crewmen rose with red fire in their eyes. The laughter began again. Elsewhere, Loken walked through the darkness. He had brought Mercedes aboard. He had allowed Samus to return. The demon had haunted him since the earliest days of the heresy. Now it had taken the woman he had crossed the system to save. Loken stopped thinking of himself as a knight-errant. He became Cerberus again, the last hunter of the Luna wolves, and he followed the demon deeper into the ship. While the phalanx fought for its soul, Abaddon fought for Luna's future. His warriors drove into the seventh fane of the Selenar. This was one of the last sanctuaries of the gene cults that had once ruled Luna. Here, the gene seed of the legions had been multiplied. Here, armies could be created. Horus wanted those secrets intact. Heliosa 78, the last Selenar matriarch, intended to deny them to him. As Abaddon approached, she began mixing a poison that would destroy everything her people had preserved. Energy barriers shifted around her. Guardian constructs attacked from every direction. Even the Justerin could not reach her in time. Zardu Layak tore a path through the barriers with sorcery. Abaddon charged through the opening. Behind him, Layak was struck down by a guardian beast. Ahead of them, Heliosa raised the poison over the genetic legacy of the legions. Across Luna and Phalanx, two battles reached the same point. One for the power to create new space marines, the other for the greatest fortress ever built by them. And in the darkness, Loken found the trail he had been searching for. It led to Mercedes.
Loken found Mercedes above a plasma junction deep inside the phalanx. But Samus found him first. The reactor chamber vanished. In its place stood the whisperheads of 6319. Where Loken had first encountered the demon, where the heresy had truly begun for him. Mercedes called his name. For one moment, he believed she had returned. Then she crushed the armor around his wrists and threw him down. Samus raised Loken's sword. It mocked him for every moment of hope that had brought him pain. Jubal, the warrior lodges, Horus, And now, Mercedes. The sword rested against his throat. But inside her mind, Mercedes could see the creature controlling her. The shadow that had worn the faces of Keeler and Nihilus. The thing that had turned her memories into weapons. Samus told her there was no escape. Mercedes looked at Loken. Then she answered, "No." She forced her mind against the demon. In the world of thought, she drove Loken's sword through its throat. Across the phalanx, Samus recoiled. And for one moment, Mercedes controlled her body again. She told Loken the truth. Her mind was the doorway. While that door remained open, Samus could return no matter how many times Dorn destroyed its body. If it could not capture the phalanx, it would destroy the fortress. There was only one way to close the door. Loken understood. Mercedes apologized that no one might ever tell his story. She thanked her friend. Then she stepped backward and fell into the plasma. Samus rushed into her mind with a howl of rage, but it was too late. Mercedes Olatom vanished in the light. The doorway closed. Across the phalanx, the demons disappeared. The fortress survived. But victory had become too small a word. Sigismund's fleet had driven into the traitor ships surrounding the phalanx. His warriors fought their way aboard. They found Dorn alive. The Praetorian had saved his flagship. He could not bring it home. The walls of heaven had fallen. Dorn gave command of the phalanx to Sukassin. She would gather the scattered loyalist fleets and continue the war across the system. Dorn returned to Terra with Sigismund. Loken returned aboard Malkador's gray ship. Mori and Noon were waiting. Noon asked where Mercedes was. Loken could not answer. On Luna, another ending had been decided. Heliosa 78 held the power to destroy the Selenar's genetic legacy. Abaddon offered her the same choice the Emperor had once given her people. Serve, or watch everything you preserved become ash. Heliosa could not destroy the hope of her kind. She bowed. The Selenar would serve Horus. Abaddon gave his command. Build us warriors. Build us legions. Luna fell. Mars burned beneath the dark mechanicum. The outer system lay broken, and still ships poured from the wound in reality. Horus watched from the vengeful spirit. He saw the phalanx escape. He saw Dorn racing back to Terra. None of it mattered. The Solar War had never been about destroying every defender. It had been about opening a road. That road now ended at Terra. On the 13th of Secundus, the surviving Imperial ships plunged through the Throne World's defenses. Traitor ships followed them into orbit. Mines detonated. Surface batteries fired. Rockets rose from hidden silos. Warships crowded across the sun until morning became darkness. Dorn returned to the Imperial Palace.
Above him, the first shells began to fall. Beyond reality, the Emperor sat before a dying fire. The Chaos Gods waited in the forest around him. Then Horus stepped into the light. The Emperor looked old. The fire holding back the darkness had faded to embers. Horus called his father a tyrant, a ruler who had built an empire on lies and slaughter. He reached into the fire and lifted its last burning fragment. The flame died in his hand. "You are not strong enough," Horus told him. "You never were." The forest disappeared. Only Horus's laughter remained. "Run, father. Run and know that I am coming." The solar war was over. For 7 years, Terra had prepared for this moment. Every fortress had been strengthened. Every army had been gathered. It had not been enough. The War Master had crossed the impossible distance. His legions filled the sky. His brothers stood beside him. The gods of chaos stood behind him. And before him waited the Emperor. The Horus heresy had reached its final battlefield. The siege of Terra had begun.